What a great way to start the year with truth from the first two chapters of Paul's letter to the Romans. And it's a great foundation because what Paul's talking about here is the foundation for our entire lives, the gospel. Verse 1, he says, everything that I do is about the gospel. Why is the gospel so important? Paul says because the gospel is the fulfillment of everything that the prophets promised in the Old Testament. Because, Paul says, the gospel is the one and only reason for which Jesus came and lived and died on the cross and rose again. And because he says the gospel is the hope for the whole world. Verse 16 of chapter 1, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it's the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes. Everyone who believes. That means whoever puts their trust in Jesus Christ, whoever believes that his death and his resurrection made it possible for them to be forgiven and to be reconciled to God. Well, that leads to the question, why do we need to be forgiven and reconciled to God? In the last part of chapter 1, Paul says it's because people have been deceived into believing that they could be their own gods. People have been deceived into thinking they could rely on their own wisdom, that they could live for their purposes, for their glory, that they could be in charge of their own lives. You see, we don't need forgiveness and reconciliation because we broke a bunch of rules or because we did a bunch of bad things. It's because we have bad hearts. Paul says in verse 21 that the problem began when people stopped acknowledging God as God. When people decided that they didn't want to allow him to be the one to define what's right and what's wrong, that they didn't want him to be the one who defined what their lives were about, that they didn't want him to be the one to lead them and to guide them. And because of that, Paul said, people just started living according to whatever they thought was good. They started trusting in their own wisdom, and in doing so, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And they started seeking after the things that God created rather than really seeking God himself. And what's the result of that? Everything we see around us, the sin and pride and greed and jealousy and anger and selfishness, corruption, deceit, all of the things we see in the world are because people stopped acknowledging God as God. And I mean, honestly, God would have been completely justified then, and he would be completely justified now to just wipe us all off the face of the earth because of our rebellion. It would have been right. We deserve it. But the wonderful news of the gospel is that he didn't do that. Instead, he made a way so that we could be saved, so that we could be forgiven, so that we could be reconciled to him, and that we could really have life. Chapter 2, Paul makes it very clear that nobody is a child of God because of anything about them, because they came from a Christian family, because they know the Bible so well, because they are so religious and they work so hard in the church to serve God and to try to earn his favor. No, if you're a child of God, Paul says in verse 4, it's only because of the infinite kindness of God. And then at the end of chapter 2, he makes it clear that nobody is a child of God because of any of their efforts to serve him on the outside. If you are a child of God, it's because of a powerful, life-transforming work of the Spirit of God on the inside. I don't earn praise from God because I'm a pastor, or because I'm a missionary, or because I read my Bible every day. I only do those things because I love him, because I already know that I have everything I need for life from him. And so I do those things, but all credit, all praise, all honor, all glory, it goes to him.